Welcome back to the YouTube home for BamaOnline.com. Travis Reier, senior analyst for BOL, alongside team analyst Clint Lamb. We got a new program for you here on the show. It's true or false for the Alabama Crimson Tide, and we're going to get specific with 4 items of interest, Clint, and a lot to talk about this week, obviously. A lot of people with a lot to talk about, it seems like, following Alabama's home defeat at the hands of the University of Texas. You got former players chirping in both ways. You got Nick Saban saying, look, if we don't play well, we deserve to be criticized. Been no shortage of action on social media and just the response in general. Although I guess at the same time, not all that surprising. It's a spot you're not used to seeing Alabama in.
Yeah, it's I don't think it was that they lost. It was the way they lost. Now, granted, if they even lose, you're going to get some overreaction. You're going to get some hot takes. People, it's felt like, especially I would say when I first started. I'm sure it was happening before then, but even dating back to like Clemson 2018 national championship beatdown, you get those people who start suggesting that maybe it's time for Nick Saban to move on and retire. After one game, they were undefeated. It had kind of rocked everybody. They had played incredible offense. They get beat. Some things don't go their way, and the score ends up pretty lopsided, the most lopsided loss of the Nick Saban era. And you immediately have people thinking, okay, it's time for him to move on. So if you're getting that from that kind of season and that kind of performance, losing double digits at home, to a team, very talented, but a lot of people going in thought Alabama still had more talent. I'm not shocked at the response at all, but it has been, there's been some overreaction.
It's been a lot. There's no doubt about it. And look, this is a team, this is a program, 6-3 in its last 9 games going back to last season. I think you got to go back to Nick's first year in 2007 to find a similar kind of run. But we'll get into some of that as we move through the segment here and we take a look at some of these items of interest. And we'll start true or false, Clint, with this simple question, or it's probably not all that simple when we get to talking about it. But if a quarterback change is going to be made for this team, this is the week that it will happen. True or false, Clint?
Man, that's a tough question because I think there's positives and negatives to both. The positive is if you are thinking that a change is inevitably going to happen, if you're the coaching staff, if you see it trending in that direction, this is a good week to go ahead and get Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson. I would think it would be Buckner, but it still could be Ty. Go ahead and get them some practice reps with the first team. Go ahead and get them some live game reps because you can practice all you want to, but it really takes those in-game live reps to really understand what all. I think Jalen Milroe, after spending the entire offseason going, getting a majority of the reps and being the first guy with the first team and all this stuff, when it goes live, it's a different beast, especially against a team like Texas. And obviously USF is not Texas, but I think they got some areas where they can cause some issues for Alabama, certainly. So that it would be beneficial if you were going to make a switch to go ahead and be getting somebody else live game reps. At the same time, do you announce that move or that potential move now before you got Ole Miss and the start of this SEC schedule and you give other teams time to prepare? That's another question. I think right now, and the true or false was, do they actually make the quarterback switch? Correct?
Or is this the week if they do it? If they were going to do it, should this be the week that they do it?
Okay. Well, I would say I think Jalen Milroe is going to be the starter. If that, I don't know if that exactly, but I think that you'll see more opportunities for at least one other guy. I would think it would probably just be one other guy. So I'm gonna say, I would. Then that's tough, Travis. You're right out the gate.
I'll jump in. I'm gonna go true. If you're thinking you're gonna make a change, if you're of that mindset at this point that it's more of an inevitability, I say true, and I'll tell you why. Because you typically would consider this more, I think, going into a bye week, but Alabama doesn't get that until the end of October, and you've got SEC play coming up. This almost feels like a reset week. This feels like, okay, this is a do-over going back to even Middle Tennessee. So if you're considering do-overs, not only at quarterback, but maybe some other positions, this would seem to be the week to do it. Yeah, you're going on the road, but it's probably going to be as much of an Alabama crowd at Raymond James Stadium on Saturday as anything else. So I think it's true. If you're going to make a change at quarterback, this is the week you do it because of the timing and how the rest of the schedule sets up. Now, there's a team dynamic to consider in all this too, Clint. You're sending a message if you make the change at quarterback. Okay, we're making changes elsewhere too, because as we know, quarterback hasn't been the only problem. I'm not speaking so much to the secondary because I think you look at that area and you understand there's new faces back there. There's going to be communication issues. There's going to be continuity issues. I'm talking more about the offensive line.
Absolutely.
If you're going to make a change at quarterback, I think you almost have to make a change up front, not to necessarily justify any move you make if you're Nick Saban, but we talk about the eyes of the coaching staff being all on this roster right now after a loss. Well, guess what? The roster's looking at the coaching staff too to see how they respond, right?
Absolutely. And that's a great point. And that kind of makes you, I would say with someone like Seth McLaughlin, he's been there for a couple of years. You've seen some really good out of him, and it hadn't just been like a splash performance. You've seen him string together some pretty good performances. So, has he earned more leeway? I will say that this is becoming the fact that you're now back-to-back weeks of having the same issue. And going back and watching the tape, I don't just think it was poor snaps. I don't think he did a great job blocking. Now, granted, it was a tough interior defensive front that Texas had. I mean, sometimes you got to give credit to the person they're going against. It's just a really good player. They're going to be playing on Sundays. Sweat's a big body guy. He's tough to move. Byron Murphy is a major problem, a big disruptor along that defensive front. But at the same time, I agree that you can't watch not only the poor snaps. It's like we talk about things that Jalen Milroe can't do that will get you beat that he's doing. Seth McLaughlin, even though Milroe has kind of overcome a lot of that and kind of masked it a little bit, he's turned some poor snaps into some explosive big plays, some third down conversions, some touchdowns, running it, throwing it, the whole 9 yards. But eventually, those are the kind of things that are going to get you beat. Rolling a snap back there that Milroe's not able to get on, you turn it over, and now, you end up losing a second game, and you have no room for error now. If you lose a second game, your chances of going to the college football playoff are, you're in rough shape. Yeah. I mean, you would need so much to happen that's not going to happen. So you're pretty much done. So, I mean, I agree with you. If they're going to make changes at quarterback, at the very least, you need to entertain making some changes elsewhere. Now, my question would be, is that Dalcourt sliding inside?
Yeah, that's the thing. Even if you want to make changes from guard to guard, you're probably still going to be in a position of having one of those guys on the field if you make a change at center, because Dalcourt, you would think, is next guy up at the center position. So a couple different things you have to consider there. For me, after the Texas game, left guard, center, right guard, all should be under heavy scrutiny in terms of playing time moving forward. So we'll see how that plays out. Our next true or false, Clint Lamb. True or false, we will learn more about this Alabama team this week than we did even last week against an 11th ranked at the time Texas team.
I think that's certainly a possibility in some ways, because I think it's, you faced a lot of adversity. You saw about as much of a down moment as we've seen an Alabama team face. We've seen some other down moments, don't get me wrong, and pretty close ones too. But just like I said, losing by double digits at home this early in the year, how does everybody respond? You've got former players making criticisms, challenging the toughness of some of these guys. And so how do they respond? If they go out there against USF and they struggle, they continue to struggle, you don't see things getting fixed. You see dysfunction and things like that. I mean, I think that would be rather revealing as far as, okay, this team does not face adversity well. They don't respond well. So I think it can be really revealing. At the same time, last week was a huge challenge. And I do think that one thing about playing those kind of games is that you can go through practice. I mean, you got your defensive line going against your offensive line. So if one of them looks really good and the other one doesn't, how much of that is your offensive line is going to be productive, or your defensive line is probably not going to be as good as you think that it is. Like, you need to face other opponents to figure some of these things out. So playing a quality team pretty much across the board, there's nowhere where you look at Texas and say they were weak here. Offensively, defensively, they have serviceable secondary, second level defensive line, offensive line, tight ends, wide receivers, running backs, everything. They are serviceable to good, to really good, to elite at pretty much all these different spots. So you were able to expose a lot of where you need to work on. You would like to see improvement in that. And so I would probably go ahead and say true that there are, in some ways, you are going to be able to learn more about Alabama and, used to. And I've mentioned this already. When Alabama lost a game, you needed to pity the next opponent because they were going to completely, it was going to be a beatdown. And, Alabama would look sharp. They would look pissed off. Tyler Booker's talking about how pissed off they are right now. Does that reflect or show on Saturday? And if it does, I think you can start to feel encouraged. There's only so much that you can take away from this game, in my opinion. But you at least need to see some of these little things being worked on and better execution, better play calling, a better flow of the usage of personnel. And then also just, guys, a lot less talk and a lot more do.
Yeah, talking season's over, right? It's show me season at this point. And when I look at this Alabama team right now, I'm more concerned about the wiring as much as anything else, because sort of to your point, Texas did to Alabama what Alabama has typically done to others. So what will be interesting to see is there an Alabama after effect on Alabama this week?
Good point.
It kind of got treated the way it's treated people for so long under Nick Saban. And how many times have we seen it with Alabama opponents? It's not just the Alabama game that was a problem. The next week, you saw it linger into that opponent as well. Look, I agree. This shouldn't be much of a problem for Alabama from an opponent standpoint with South Florida. It's a team that just snapped an 11-game losing streak going back to last season, and it really needed all 4 quarters last week against an FCS opponent to do that. So this week is entirely about Alabama. And in the areas that you have your biggest questions right now, just not in terms of intangibles, but also in the way of quarterback and other areas of this football team, there's a lot to figure out before you jump in against Ole Miss and you go to Starkville and then you see Texas A&M on the road, down the road a little bit. So I'm going to go true on that one too. I think we're going to learn more about Alabama and what could be some difficult conditions. 2:30 kickoff in Tampa, Florida, on September the 16th. Who knows what you could get? You could get awful humid heat, those type of things. You could also get thunderstorms. You could have your routine totally disrupted just with conditions down there. So we'll see how that plays out. I'm going true there too as well. Here's another one for you, Clint. True or false? And this is more of a way too early, true or false, when you consider what we're still talking about over the next month and a half. But at this point, I'm going to give you this one. For the first time since 2007, Alabama will enter the month of November with 2 losses. Got to go back to Nick's first team again, another one of those, to find the last time that happened. Where do you sit on that one right now, understanding there's still a long way to go?
Man, so you've got LSU in November. That's a positive. You can have Tennessee in October though. So Tennessee's struggling too, though. I mean, I understand they're 2-0, but this is not. Joe Milton's got some things he's got to figure out too. Alabama's not the only SEC program right now with quarterback problems, or they're trying to figure some things out at quarterback. In fact, who is really just this is an SEC team that's completely set. Even like Jaden Daniels and a lot of these other teams. I mean, I would say Jackson Dart's probably the best quarterback in the SEC
I'm
right
a
now.
big Jackson Dart guy at this point because
he's grown.
If for nothing else, that dude is tough. He has shown me that when it gets hard, he's good with it. And I think that's the question we have with some of these situations still around the league.
Absolutely. And so, I'm going to say false. I don't think that I would assume, because you got a team that's backed against the wall. Like, you can't afford. This is something that Alabama's always kind of had, is that they're entering November, especially, or at least getting deep into October. And they're in a situation where even if they drop a game, they still could be in position for an SEC championship, still in position for a college football playoff. If they drop another game now, you have put your destiny in the hands of someone else, and you've got to have a lot that goes wrong for other teams for you to get in. I would think that this loss to Texas would rally the troops, and we'll kind of have to wait and see how it goes. I understand now more so anybody that was predicting a 3-loss team. You feel I thought that was absurd at the time. I thought 10-2 was kind of the floor. I thought 11-1 was a lot more reasonable. I'm not as confident in that now as I was a couple of weeks ago. I'll tell you that. But I will say I still think that you got LSU, Auburn in Auburn against Hugh Freeze. You never know what can happen with that. So as far as getting to a second loss, you can get into November and still drop one. But I would say they go into November with just one loss. Well, that would be false, I believe.
False. Yeah, that was the question. That would this team, in your opinion, ultimately head into November with 2 losses? I gotta go false right now. Not so much because of really much that I've seen from Alabama, but as you sort of touched on, Tennessee isn't blowing what little hair I have left back, um, and Texas A&M. That performance at Miami last week, that could still be a very tough trip for Alabama coming up in a few weeks and in taking on A&M on the road. I'm not ready to go ahead and mark that entirely as a W for Alabama. But again, kind of the deficiencies that we've seen with Tennessee, and that's a big game coming up for the Vols Saturday night at Florida. I think a telling game for Tennessee. And also having Ole Miss at home. If Ole Miss a week from Saturday was in Oxford, I would be much more concerned about that game than I am, because we tend to forget Alabama was in survival mode in Oxford with Bryce Young last year. And it took some of Bryce's best stuff to get Alabama out of there with a W. So being at home helps a lot. It is way too early, but I will go with false on that one as well. As we wrap up our true and false segment with Clint Lamb here on the YouTube home for BamaOnline.com, also the Bama Online podcast. Clint, this time around, the Dynasty is dead talk. Does it have more substance than it did, say, in 2015, which I think a lot of parallels are being drawn between that Alabama team and that early loss to Ole Miss and Tuscaloosa, the early loss to Texas and Tuscaloosa this time around? Quarterback situation with both those teams at the early stages of the season. What do you think? True or false? More substance this time to that than there was, say, in 2015?
As unfortunate as it is, I'm gonna say true, and the reason is that I think when you look at, and I've talked about this already, but I'll reiterate it here. All these principles that you used to be able to apply to Alabama football, like I said, I already touched on one where it's, I pity the next opponent after an Alabama loss. That hadn't always been the case. Ole Miss didn't catch a beating last year. When you look at Texas A&M last year, there was so many signs. There was a talent gap. I wouldn't say talent necessarily, but just the play. Texas A&M ended up having a very poor year. Alabama was a big favorite in that game. Nick Saban had, Jimbo Fisher had gone after Nick Saban. That's just not something you do. They had beaten Alabama the year before, and College Station fans rushed the field. It was just this huge combination of, these are the kind of things, next time you step on a field with Alabama, you're catching a beat down. And not only did it go to the wire, which, quarterback play could have, factored into that. You didn't have your star quarterback who the entire offense was built around. I know that plays a part. Jalen Milroe had 3 turnovers. That certainly, who knows what would have happened if that didn't, take place. But it's like you didn't see the beatdown happen. You go into this game and it's like a lot of people are picking Texas and a lot of people are questioning Alabama. And that's typically the time that you would see Alabama make a statement and come out and just hit somebody in the mouth. And, that's kind of where I was going. The old Alabama would have used this as a launching point to let everybody know we're still Alabama. And you didn't see that. You saw penalties, continued issues with penalties. You saw uncharacteristic mistakes. You saw the offense and the defense couldn't get on the same page. You saw, I feel like the coaching staff even a little bit got a little bit flustered throughout the game. It feels different than it's ever felt before. The way that they lost, and it's not just this one loss. It's like you keep expecting them to bounce back. and they continue to have the same sort of issues. It's close games constantly, fighting, and that's going to happen. NIL, transfer portal, it's certainly even things out a little bit. So you're going to see that regardless. I mean, Georgia plays in some close games against some teams that they probably shouldn't. Anybody's going to, but it just feels like that. There's been times where you've exited games in recent years and you felt like Alabama got out coached. That's not something that we've often said. So I would say, I'm not saying that it's time to hit the panic button by any means, but I think there's certainly more substance to it now than there ever was before. But that doesn't mean that it's definitely happening.
Yeah, it's a loaded question for sure because in hindsight, we had the benefit of knowing that the 2015 team responded by going on and winning a national championship. But I'm going to say, even though there are a lot of parallels between the two teams, because at that point in 2015, Alabama had gone 2013, 2014 without national championships. We've seen Alabama the last 2 years go a couple of years without national championships. But the thing about that 2015 team was that you knew it had a dog in number 2 in the backfield that could get the job done. And defensively, you had some really good players that you were a little more certain about, I think, with that team than you were even, say, this one. More question marks, I guess, is what the argument would be. So I'm going to go true. But I also think even more so than that 2015 team, if you're big on quarterback play, in 2015, at that point, you couldn't see Tua Tagovailoa coming in or Bryce Young coming in down the road to kind of push that thing along. And certainly what Jalen did. Jalen Hurts was very, very important. Mac Jones. But if you're big on quarterback play, the only reason why I would consider false to this one is that help is on the way. And I think help is already in the program potentially with Dylan Lonergan. So if quarterback's where you start, and a lot of people do, Dylan Lonergan, Julian Sayin coming on board, Clint, that's your light at the end of the tunnel right now. And also understanding Alabama positionally is going to recruit at a very high level.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I do hope that fans don't put too much pressure on Julian Sayin to come in and be the savior right from day one. I mean, even Bryce Young. Now, granted, Mac Jones, he had gotten enough playing time. He had shown growth. He was battling. The team loved him. So there was some, I don't know what's going on with someone like Dylan Lonergan, or if it ends up being Jalen Milroe or Tyler Buckner or Ty Simpson or whoever next year. I don't think that the assumption should be, hey, let's hand the reins by the first. Anything that we've learned with Nick Saban in Alabama, you have to earn it. Even some of these like transfer portal guys who are literally brought in to start or to have a big role, they're brought in those first, that first week or two. If you arrive in the summer, Tyler Steen last year, Jalen Key wasn't running with the first team defense early in fall camp. They have to earn their spot. And so to assume that, there's going to be this freshman quarterback who is very talented for sure, but I also think it was very beneficial for Bryce Young to sit for a year. If you have to play him, that's part of it. But, Dylan Lonergan, a lot of people feel like he might be the most talented quarterback or complete quarterback, what Alabama's looking for at the position on this roster. And so some fans will say, why aren't you playing him? Well, I don't think they want to ruin him. I mean, if you get him out there and you create some bad habits, he's under duress, he makes some mistakes, his confidence gets affected. The quarterback is the number one position where you can ruin a guy's, progress or development by playing him too early or putting him in bad situations. Do you really want a true freshman sitting behind that offensive line with the way it's pass protecting right now? Probably not. So, I just hope that fans don't automatically say Julian Sayin's going to be the guy. I feel like that's unfair, even though I certainly think from day one he's going to be in that conversation. Depends on how quickly he picks things up. And, but there's some other options too. If he's set for a year behind Dylan Lonergan or even a couple of years, not saying that would happen necessarily, but if that happens, I don't think that's the worst thing in the world because I think Alabama feels really good about what he could potentially be. But quarterback is where it starts. And I will say, as much as we talk about all these other flaws, you had Bryce Young last year, a very special player, the number one overall pick. How many of those has Alabama had? Not many. And so, but he masked a lot of problems and he overcame a lot. The quarterbacks that are currently in the room, you don't feel as confident in that group. So if you can get the right quarterback in there, you can build the rest of it around them, at least enough to be in contention or in the conversation. We'll just kind of have to see how it plays out. But yeah, that's if you're a Bama fan, the way that they're continuing to recruit and the fact that you have some talent in the pipeline at quarterback that you feel pretty good about, I would say that's the number one reason to continue to be optimistic.
Yeah, it feels like a bridge year in some ways to the guy, but who knows? Maybe one of these three, from Jalen to Buckner to Ty Simpson, take this thing in the next couple of weeks, because I think it's got to happen. It's going to go down one way or the other. It's going to stay status quo, or it's going to change dramatically in these next 2 or 3 weeks at the latest. And then you see how you ride from there. But absolutely, Lonergan, uh, Holstein, and then also Sayin coming in too. Some reason for optimism, absolutely. Well, Clint, this one was a lot of fun. I like to think of these things as efficient, informative, and fun. What do you think? Did we check the boxes, you think, today?
I'm exiting this video recording, whatever you want to call it, feeling more informed myself. I feel like I have a better idea of where this team stands, which is why I love having these conversations, by the way.
Yeah,
I feel like
usually I worry about the person on the other side, their head hitting the keyboard by the time I'm done talking. So as long as you're able to remain conscious during my bluster, it's greatly appreciated. Seriously, good stuff. Really enjoy you and Jimmy and your talks here on the YouTube home for Bama Online as well. And we got so much more video content coming. So subscribe to the video home, the YouTube home of BamaOnline.com. On YouTube, it's at BOL on YouTube. That's where you're going to find us. Subscribe, turn on those notifications. You'll be alerted to all of the content we have coming your way. And of course, right there with us at BamaOnline.com, come hang out with us on the roundtable or premium message board. That's where you're going to find out everything you want to know or need to know, or both, first on the roundtable, premium message board at BamaOnline.com. Thanks a lot, Clint.
absolutely, Travis. Good talking to you, brother.
For Clint Lamb, Travis Reier, thanking you for tuning in right here for True or False on the YouTube home for BamaOnline.com. The show will also upload to the Bama Online podcast. So anywhere you consume pods, you're going to find this show as well. Clint, Travis, wishing you a great weekend. And until next time, so long, everybody.